Morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you for being here, or if you're not here and you're watching the recording, welcome as well. It is a real pleasure to be welcoming so many people from all around the world today. We have over 500 people registered, and if we all attend on time, we are going to break my Zoom connection. So hopefully a few of those people are planning to watch the recording and we won't hit our 500 registrations or 550 odd registrations, but you'll all get to watch it on the recording. Today I want to talk about learnership, this idea of learning being a skillful process. Over the next 45 minutes or so, I want to talk to you about what learnership is. I want to describe the 5 key components of learnership and the 6 different types of learners. And then I'm going to invite you to extend this learning, because what we're doing here today is just a small fraction of this work. For a long time now, teacher professional learning has focused very much on what teachers do in the classroom. We talk about making learning visible to students. We talk about setting challenging tasks and giving meaningful feedback. And schools have invested an enormous amount of time and money and resources into training teachers. And we have some extraordinarily skillful teachers in our midst. In my work, and I work with thousands of teachers every year, I meet some of the most skillful people that are going around. These people are top of their profession. And yet, what can so often happen is a teacher will set a challenging task, identify the student's learning zone, give the student the task, and the student will say, "Can I have something easier, please?" Or they'll opt out altogether. Teachers will feel like they're spending hours carefully crafting formative feedback for students, only to have the student then ignore it. And so the idea here is that while we can be enormously skillful teachers, learning doesn't happen until students engage in the learning process in an equally skillful way. And that's what this idea of learnership is about. It's about shining this light on learning as a skillful process and helping students engage in that process in an increasingly skillful way. I was reminded as I was doing this work, sort of starting to formulate it 6 to 12 months ago, what it all meant. I was reminded of some work by John Holt. Now, John Holt, some of you might know, is an educator in the US some 20, 30 years ago now. But one of the things he said that really struck me was that, oops, use a funny color there. Try that one again. There you go. That learning isn't a product of teaching. That learning is the product of the activity of learners. And I remembered that. I remember thinking about it at the time. I thought, what a profound thing to say. That learning isn't the result of teaching, it's the result of the activity of learners. And it reminded me again of something that one of my early mentors taught me. Very early on in my career, one of my mentors sat me down and said, "James, never work harder than your students." I just went, wow, like never work. How many of us as teachers feel like we're dragging students through the learning process? That we're the one doing all the hard work in the classroom. We set the challenges, we identify the mistakes, we tell the students the strategies they need to engage in to fix those mistakes. And all this time, we're just dragging some of these reluctant, passive learners through the learning process. And as a result, we're exhausted. I was working with a teacher in Sydney not long ago, and she was telling me how she was getting great results, like really good results in her Year 12 students, a final year of school students. But she was getting those results by taking the students' work home every night, going through it, writing in some cases more than they had written on their own assignments, to tell them what they needed to do to fix their mistakes, to improve their results. And she was doing all the hard work. She was not quite spoon feeding, but it bordered on that. And as a result, she held all the responsibility for the students' learning. And the results they were going to get were largely a reflection of what she was doing in the classroom, not what the students were doing. And It reminded me of this, this cartoon. Some of you will have seen the cartoon like this before, that I taught my dog to whistle. I don't hear him whistling. I didn't say he'd learnt it. I said I taught him. And there's this idea again that while we can be engaging in the teaching process really effectively to the peak of our abilities, we can use all of John Hattie's high performance, high impact teaching strategies. But if students aren't holding up their end of the bargain, then learning doesn't actually take place. So I'm curious now, I'm going to look across. When you see me looking in this direction, I'm looking at the chat box. I'm curious now to know, what do you see? What do you experience in your classrooms and in your schools that make you think that maybe students aren't holding up their end of the bargain, that students aren't engaging in the learning process as skillfully or as effectively as they might? So in the chat box now, what are you seeing them doing? Lack of curiosity. I can see Irene's popped the first one in there. They're not wanting to learn, they're wanting to be fed. They haven't got that passion to go out and take on a challenge and find things out. Not acting on feedback. Doesn't that give you oh man, the number of times I've worked with students and I've given them such good feedback. Like, I know it's good feedback. And they just go, yeah, whatever, thanks. Well, they don't even look at it in the first place. Put their heads down on the desk, playing games, that learned helplessness. I missed the person's name, it went past too quick. Not finding relevance, not offering answers, opting out, being too scared to volunteer an answer for fear of being wrong. All those things. Lack of resilience. If we get a chance later on today, we're going to talk a little bit about resilience. And I'm going to suggest to you that resilience is the bottom line. It shouldn't be our goal, it's our baseline for our students. And what we should be looking for is something that is referred to as being anti-fragile. And our top learners today, our agile learners, are actually anti-fragile. But we'll see if we get time to get to there. No lateral thinking. That lateral thinking, when I was at school, I didn't realise you could learn to do that. Edward de Bono taught me how to be a lateral thinker. And look, can't see the relevance. There's the anxiety stuff, avoidance of tasks. I love the task avoidance. Some students are so creative with how they avoid those tasks, aren't they? Just out of curiosity, just put a yes in the chat box. If you've got students that stretch out every minute of the lesson to avoid getting to the hard task at the end of the lesson. Who does? Yeah. Look at the chat box going nuts. Yes, 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 yes. Some of our students are actually very creative, very lateral thinkers, but they apply that lateral thinking to getting out of work. I was very privileged recently to be invited to contribute to the Victorian Mathematics Association of Victoria, I should say, journal. And they asked me to write an article on learnership. And I thought I'd share this with you today. My lovely producer, Jane, is going to drop a copy of this article into the chat box for you to download. And this article is a lovely summary of what I want to talk about over the next 40 minutes or so. And it's the sort of thing that you could share easily. Email it to your school principal or to your colleague or to someone else who wants to find out a bit about learnership. It sort of captures this work in about 800 words or 1,000 words, something like that. So I can see Jane's dropped that in there. Take a moment, download it. If you're watching the recording, there'll be a link to this somewhere close to the recording, probably down below in the description section. So let's get talking about this. Some of you know me through my work around growth mindset. And growth mindset has an important role to play in this idea of learnership. It's not an essential component of learnership in that it's not a case of effective learners have a growth mindset and ineffective learners have a fixed mindset. It doesn't work like that. But it does help you in developing learnership. One of the big misunderstandings of mindset is that a growth mindset is not the growth. A growth mindset tells you I can grow. but it doesn't tell you how. When I look at Carol Dweck's book, one of the things that really strikes me about it is that she talks about a lot of world-class people, high performers with fixed mindsets. You don't need a growth mindset to grow. It helps, don't get me wrong, it absolutely helps, but you don't need it. From the growth mindset perspective, the opposite of I can't isn't I can. The opposite of I can't is I could. See, the big problem here is that someone with a growth mindset or someone with a fixed mindset doesn't understand themselves as a learner. Someone with a fixed mindset thinks learning is about discovering their abilities. They come into our classrooms and they look inside themselves and ask, have I got the abilities to do this? And if the answer is no, well, then there's not much point in putting any effort in, is there? I've tried it once, I can't do it, I'm not going to be able to do it tomorrow. And so they'll ignore our feedback. That was one of the comments that came up before. As we develop a more growth-orientated mindset, what happens is you start understanding yourself as a learner. Instead of looking inside yourself and asking yourself, have I got the abilities? Am I able to do this? You look outwards and ask yourself, what do I need to do to gain those abilities? I'm not expected to have the ability to do this maths task or play this instrument or write that essay, but there's a process that we call learning that I can go through to become the person who can. And once you understand that, once you understand yourself as a learner, the next sensible question to ask is, how do I get really good at learning? And that's what learnership is about. It's not about engaging in the learning process or not. It's about asking yourself, how more effectively, how more skillfully can I engage in this learning process? My time and energy are limited resources. I don't want to waste them. I don't want to spend them. I want to invest them in becoming a better learner. And so that's why this work around the mindset continuum, and I'll ask Jane just to drop a copy of this into the chat box too, in case anyone's not familiar with it. Why this idea of the mindset continuum relates but isn't part of this idea of learnership. That as we move along this continuum, that recognizing mindset isn't fixed or growth, it's a case of moving along this continuum. We start to understand ourselves more and more as a learner. And as we do that, as we understand ourselves more as a learner, we engage in the learning process more authentically and open ourselves up to engage in that learning process more skillfully. And that speeds up the process of becoming a skillful learner. You can grow with a fixed mindset. You're just fighting against the process the whole time. So let's have a look at these 5 elements of skillful learning. When I talk about learnership, there are 5 elements that we need to think about. That's about how we respond to challenge, how we develop our habits of mind and how we go about doing that, how we gather information to help us grow from feedback and mistakes, and importantly, how we invest our time and money. Not time and money, time and energy, beg your pardon. We often talk about that as effort, but it's not about effort. It's not the amount of time and energy students spend on task. It's how that time and energy is spent that's important. We'll get to that in a minute. Let's talk about this idea of challenge. We can't grow without challenge. Without stretching beyond our current best, we won't experience any growth. And so a learner's relationship with challenge, how they feel about challenge, whether they're inclined to take on challenges or avoid them, is a central part, and perhaps in some respects a foundational part of this idea of learnership. In my book, The Learning Landscape, I talk about helping students understand the nature of challenge through these 4 different challenge pits. That not all challenge pits are the same, that some challenges are actually easy, and it's like going downhill. Some challenges are way too hard, and that's like trying to go up a cliff. It's impossible. But when we set the right amount of challenge, when we go through what I call a learning challenge, we actually stretch ourselves and grow as a result. And understanding this nature of challenge, what it means to challenge ourselves in the right way, is one of the cornerstones of this work. Let me explain it a bit. Many of us grow like this. In the beginning, growth is easy, and then it kind of plateaus out and we reach what Anders Ericsson, the world's expertise expert, calls this performance plateau. And this part down here, where growth is quick and easy, this is what we call our comfort zone. And our comfort zone is full of those things that are things we've mastered a long time ago, the things we learnt years and years ago and can do easily now. But it's also full of what I call easy things you haven't done yet. The world is full of easy things that we just haven't done yet. Things we've already got the skills and talents and abilities to do, but we've just never had the need to do them. For example, as adults, most of us don't know our 13 times tables. But if I told you you needed to know them by this time tomorrow, you'd go, all right, fine. You'd be very, very confident that you'd be able to learn them by tomorrow. You know that you just have to spend a bit of time and energy and you'd get it done. This area here, where the performance plateaus out and reaches our current best, this is called our performance zone. And our performance zone demands our current peak performance, all our concentration, all our resources, all our talent, skills and abilities to produce our current best. And the challenge with this is that our current best is seductive. We can do it with confidence. We know it's going to take concentration, but we get the result from it. We know what we're going to be able to do. And a lot of our students love doing their best. Again, just in the chat box quickly, how many of you have got students that love doing their best, but won't do anything harder for fear of the mistakes that might come? Let's have a look. I bet people go, yeah, yep, sometimes, yep. Yeah, we've all got those kids. I often deal with schools that talk about how their students are perfectionists. They won't put their hand up in class for fear of making that mistake. They won't hand the work in until they know they've got it right. And they won't take on the challenge that they're not sure about. The problem here, though, is, as I said before, you don't get better by doing your best. You get better by stretching yourselves just beyond your current best. And the trouble with going beyond your current best is it doesn't feel very good. You feel uncertain, you struggle, you make mistakes. But it's exactly here that we need to get comfortable with. One of my favorite quotes, and I keep it behind my desk, is that there is no growth without discomfort. If you're feeling comfortable, if you know you're going to be able to master it, you're down here and you're learning in your comfort zone and you're learning one new thing without the benefit of learning one more difficult thing. And this idea that many of our students sacrifice the short-term satisfaction of achieving something new in their comfort or performance zone for the long-term growth and benefit of doing something in their learning zone. And so as we develop this skill of learning to differentiate, helping learners differentiate between their comfort zone, their performance zone, their learning zone, and what comes up here, which is their aspirational zone, where it's just too hard at the moment, is one of the foundational starting points. And helping students recognize that feeling, because being in your learning zone happens in your head. Right? Teachers can set challenging tasks and we can know where the next part of the learning is. But the learning's happening in that internal space, in the student's mind. And they need to understand that feeling of discomfort. I was working recently with a school that had asked me to look at their school reports. And this happens in a lot of schools. And I was reading through their reports, and one of the things I noticed is that the school kept making apologies for challenge. They would say things like, James works diligently, even when faced with challenging tasks. What do you mean, even when? I don't really care about working diligently on easy tasks, but sometimes we make this exception, this apology. We say, sorry you had to work so hard, but I'm glad you did. No, it's that struggle that we need to get used to. And recognizing that our comfort zone feels like a task. The answer is immediately apparent. We know what we're going to need to be able to do. It's just going to take time, like learning your 13 times tables. If what you're doing today feels like one of those things you just know you're going to be able to do it, then you're in your comfort zone. You might be learning something new, but you're not doing something more challenging. You're not raising the bar. If it feels like a performance, if it feels like, ta-da, doing your best, concentrating, focused, but you know you're going to get there, you're going to have to be careful, but you're going to get there, then that's in your performance zone. But your learning zone, the zone we want students to get comfortable with this discomfort, they feel this stretch, feels like a problem. It leaves you feeling like this. And as I list down these emotions that you feel when you're in your learning zone, I want you to reflect for a moment, when your students experience these emotions and these ideas, how do they respond? Because your learning zone feels like a stretch, not a strain. Like you shouldn't be sitting there going, totally out of my depth, got no idea how to do this. But it feels a little bit beyond your current best. It feels like that little bit of stretch, that little bit of discomfort. It feels like that elastic band that you've stretched to its limit before it snaps. 7 out of 10 uncomfortable. Not 10 out of 10 uncomfortable. But if you're 5 out of 10 uncomfortable, you're just going, yeah, I can do this. I'll get there. I'll get there. No, that's performance zone. If you're feeling like this is easy, then you're in your comfort zone. But 7 out of 10 discomfort is where learning and growth actually happens. It feels unsure, uncertain, but not completely lost. You've got that feeling of, I think I can muddle through this. I'm going to stumble. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to get things wrong from time to time, but I'll get there. And the answer's not immediately apparent. You're not looking at it going, yep, I'm going to be able to do that one. It's just like the other one. I'll do it again. You're looking at it going, what do you do here? I don't know. And importantly, it is beyond your current abilities. And helping students recognize this zone, this feeling, and getting comfortable with it and expecting to feel like that. When we see students and we say to one of them, you know, good to see you working hard today, you've been struggling on that, that's great, and turn to the other student and say, well done, you've got through that work really easily, we're actually discouraging kids from going into their learning zone. We're making them feel like that struggle is a necessary evil instead of what's required. We should be talking to this student and saying, we've just wasted your last half hour, haven't we? You should have been feeling uncomfortable like Johnny over here. But if you felt that was easy, if you cruised through it, then you're in your comfort zone or maybe your performance zone. And this was a learning opportunity. You should have been struggling a little bit. So as we develop the skill of learnership, we're helping students build a better relationship with their learning zone, to understand it to start with, but then get comfortable with that feeling and actually, in the end, seek it out. To actually find those challenges in life and go, ooh, I don't feel comfortable with that. What a great opportunity that is to learn. Instead of doing the easy thing over here, I'm going to do this one because this is an investment of my time and energy, where that is just an expense on my time and energy. The next element of learnership is this idea of the habits of mind. Once you're in your learning zone, how do you behave in order to actually succeed? Remember, being in your learning zone is to be beyond your current abilities. So you've got to be in the habit of developing those abilities. When Art Costa and Ben Akalik, and I've got a copy of their book, one of their books here, some of you will be familiar with those. And Jane, if you've got a moment, perhaps we could drop a copy of The Habits of Mind in the chat box for those of you who may be not familiar with the habits. When Art Costa and Ben Akalik identified the habits, what they were identifying were dispositions, patterns of behaviour, typical ways of behaving or habits of mind that were skillfully and mindfully, and I'll come back to those two words, employed by characteristically successful people when they're in the learning zone. What Art Costa and Ben Akalik did was, through other people's research, identified those people that were doing the most achievement, growing the most, and said, what are you doing that makes you so good? And what they recognised were not 16 behaviours that they were using that other people weren't. What they identified were the dispositions that they were skillfully and mindfully employing. And it's that idea that these people, the people who actually succeed and grow, that raise that bar, not just engage their habits of mind, not just use their habits of mind. They set out to improve, to develop, to extend, to build, to mature their habits of mind. Too many of our students, the ones that fail to progress, can work hard, like they can be head down and concentrating, but they take old learning behaviours into more difficult tasks. And as a result, the tools they've got, in the analogy of the learning landscape, the tools they carry in their backpack, aren't up to the task of climbing higher in the learning landscape. They're too focused on what they are learning when they need to be focused on how they are learning. Because the investment you get from working above the bar is developing your habits of mind. And once you've developed your habits of mind, those more mature, those more developed, more extended habits of mind can now be applied to more and more difficult tasks. And so when we look at these 16 habits of mind, the key word to remember if you're going to be working with these habits of mind in your classroom is not to ask students to use the habits of mind, but to ask what are they doing to improve their habits of mind. And as we'll see in a minute, the most skillful learners go out of their way to find opportunities to develop their habits of mind. Challenges, habits of mind are the two key behaviours, I suppose, for developing learnership. Stretching yourself beyond your current best and then developing the behaviours that allow you to reach a new standard. But to reach that new standard, you're going to need information. And skillful learners get that information from mistakes and also from feedback. And this is why we were talking before, and some of you were expressing that frustration that you're giving students information. You're telling them how to correct the mistake. You're giving them the feedback and they ignore it. And so the relationship that learners have with mistakes and with feedback is one of the key elements to becoming a more skillful learner. Because if you don't gather that information, if you're like the learners that don't want to go into their learning zone, that stay there being perfectionists and showing what they can do over and over again and avoiding those mistakes, then there's no information for you. If you're one of the students that ignores the feedback, the information's there, but you don't get it. One of the ways we talk to students to help them understand mistakes and to help them understand how to get information from mistakes and to avoid this avoidance attitude from mistakes is to recognize that not all mistakes are the same. In some of my work, and we'll provide a link to the blog where I talk about these mistakes, not all mistakes are useful. Some mistakes, in fact, should be avoided. And those students that are saying, I don't want to make mistakes, don't want to make mistakes, we should encourage that. But they need to understand the type of mistakes they should be avoiding and the mistake they are making by not making the right type of mistakes. Here, when I talk about careless mistakes and performance mistakes and sloppy mistakes and confusion mistakes, these mistakes don't help us. Aha moment mistakes, stretch mistakes, and design mistakes, mistakes where you go deliberately looking for the information. These are the mistakes that help us grow. So as we develop learnership, one of the things we're doing is helping students build a better relationship with mistakes. And I'll give you an idea. When it comes to feedback, I was working with a school in Sydney recently, and we're talking about feedback. And a lot of teachers have been given a lot of professional learning about how to give good feedback to students. But there's a problem there about giving feedback to students. You see, the most effective learners don't wait to be given feedback. And it's not even that they go up and ask for feedback after the event. They go up and they tailor the feedback before the event. So rather than waiting for you to hand back the assignment and say, here's the feedback, or coming up to you afterwards and saying, I don't understand, can you give me some feedback? The most effective learners will come up to you and say, I'm about to hand this assignment to you. Now, before I do, I want to tell you that I have been working on this element of my work. These are the problems I've encountered, and this is the feedback I need you to give me. Now, when you're reading this, when you're marking this, correcting this, whatever it is, can you make sure that you give me that feedback, please? Anything else you notice is fine, but I need that information from you. There you go. How many of our students have been taught to tailor feedback in that way? And how many times have you overheard a student that has been looking at their work and perhaps talking to a friend and said, the friend's asked, what did the teacher say about, what you were doing? Because they'd been talking about it to their friend. And the student's gone, oh, they didn't say anything about that, I don't know. They actually wanted information from you. It wasn't your mistake. You didn't know they were looking for that, but there was a lost opportunity there. So teaching students to tailor feedback like that. And then there's this notion of how we use our time and energy. That some of our students waste their time and energy. They do nothing in class. Some of our students spend their time and energy and get something back for it, but it's something easy. That's what I was talking about before when I said too many of our students confuse the immediate gratification of being in their comfort zone with the long-term benefit of being in their learning zone. And so students that have developed the skill of learning know that their time and energy is wasted if they do nothing. It is spent if they perform in their comfort or performance zone, but it is invested in their learning zone. And so learning to recognize how that time and energy is being spent is another one of the factors that makes you a more skillful learner. And here's a question for you about the messages you're sending about how time and energy is used. Imagine this scenario. Imagine a student comes up to you with a piece of work and you have a look at it and it's not fantastic. Which question are you more likely to ask them? Are you more likely to ask them, how much time did you spend on this? Or are you more likely to ask them, how did you spend your time on this? Do you ask how much or how well they spent their time? Because those two questions are profoundly different and send profoundly different messages to the student. Now, if you say it once, it's not going to make a big difference. But if you are in the habit over and over again of talking about how much time do you spend on this, how much time, you're wasting your time, how much time? If it's always about how much and not about how well you spend your time, and if you can't then elaborate on how well looks like, then we're sending some very negative messages to our students, unintentionally, but we're undermining their skillfulness in learning. Now, we've got these 5 elements: how we respond to challenge, how we develop our habits of mind. And I should point out, it's not how well developed your habits of mind are, it's how you're going about developing your habits of mind that is the skill of learning. How we gather information from feedback and mistakes, and how we distribute our time and energy. The where and how it is spent, if it's spent below the bar or above the bar. That allows us to define 6 different types of learners. And what I'd like to do over the next 10 minutes, and by the way, drop questions in along the way. I'll possibly see them, or Jane will pull me up in a little while and let me know there are questions along the way. And yes, Rihanna, I'm guessing, Rihanna Khan, our words are so powerful, such an important part of our work, particularly around mindset. The work I do around mindset, it's not just about the words, it's about what we communicate. And we communicate with our words, with our tone, with our posture, with our structures, and a whole lot of other things. With those 5 different elements that make up skillful learning, I now want to talk about what those levels of skillfulness are by talking about 6 different types of learners. Now, I don't think any learner is definitively one or the other. We're all transitioning between. But as I go through them, what I want you to be mindful of is, where do I start describing your learners? As you bring your learners to mind in your classroom, what sort of learning behaviours are they engaged in? So let's have a look at this. Let me just change my technology slightly here. There we go. And I will pop in down the bottom and get out of your way. Non-learners. Now, I don't believe we've got a lot of non-learners, but this is like the baseline. Our non-learners will avoid a challenge. These are the students that, if you offer them options A, B, and C, they'll say, do I have to? They'll nick off rather than attempt the work. They'll play games instead of doing anything at all. They're the learners that are often ignorant of their habits of mind. They've got no language to describe how they engage in the learning process. In that respect, learning kind of just happens to them, if it happens at all. They ignore mistakes. What's done is done. And they disregard any feedback. So they're unlikely to even look at the comments we write or listen to the words we're giving them. And as a result, their time and energy has no outcome at all. It's completely wasted. Where they were at the end of the lesson is pretty much exactly where they were at the start of the lesson. Beginning learners, a little bit better. Beginning learners reduce challenges. They look for the easy option, the path of least resistance. If you offer them options A, B, and C, they'll look at them and go, is there an option D? Have you got something easier for me to do? Do I have to do these? How many teachers have just gone, I know that kid? These students can describe their learning, but it's always after the event. It's always having gone through the learning process. They'll say, I had to ask some questions, I had to use what you taught last lesson, and I had to work in a group. There's no forethought, there's no planning, there's no real ability to reflect in the process and be metacognitive around their learning processes. These are the students that will recognise mistakes. That's wrong. They don't act on it. Like, they know it's wrong, but wrong is wrong, and that's just finished now. I did my learning and it's all finished. These are the students that will acknowledge your feedback. Thanks, I can see you've written a lot of things there, but won't act on them. and they spend their time doing stuff. These students can appear busy in class, but they're not getting better. They are often those students that stretch out their time. And while they mightn't be sitting twiddling their thumbs, their time and energy is spent doing things rather than achieving things. Performance learners limit their challenges. And when I say limit, they limit to their best. They're quite happy to show you what they can do, but as soon as you ask them to go one step beyond to something they're not confident in, they'll go, "Can I show you what I can do?" And they're always wanting to show you the things they know they can achieve. In that respect, they apply their habits of mind, right? Having achieved a similar standard and a similar task before, they can reapply the habits of mind to do it again and can predict which habits of mind they're going to need to use. Because they've done it before, they can do it again. These students will avoid mistakes by staying in their performance zones, and they will select your feedback. When I say select, again, just in a quick chat here in the chat box, how many of your students pay close attention to your feedback as long as the feedback says, "You've done this well, you've done this well, you've done this well"? But as soon as you get constructive, as soon as you get formative, as soon as you get a little bit critical, they go, "No, I don't want to hear that part." Always cracks me up to see the students go, "I love hearing this, but no, I don't want to hear that." And they spend their time performing. They go, "Ta-da, look what I can do. Ta-da, look what I can do. Ta-da, I can still do it." All three of these, yeah, look, many of them, most of them, yeah, not just teachers. PT, I think I'm sorry, my glasses don't go quite as far to read the names. Don't start me on some of the teachers. The whole work around mindset, don't tell anyone, is actually about teachers. Now, coming back to the task at hand, these three learners, non-learners, beginning learners and performance learners, don't actually grow. They can learn new stuff. They can cover the curriculum, but they never raise the bar. They never actually do more difficult things. And as a result, when they leave school, they lack agency. A big part of my work at the moment is to talk about learner agency. And when we come out of our schooling process not in charge of the learning process, we become the victims of our circumstances and feel powerless in the world. And if students are coming out of our schools like this, they're going to lack agency in the world. In fact, Jane, I didn't tell you I was going to do this. If we've got my learner agency document handy, we can drop that in the chat box as well, and people can have a copy of that. It'll just show you how this learnership work connects to the idea of agency. The first learner that actually raises the bar is the directed learner. And this is the learner who will attempt a challenge. They will attempt the challenge that you give them. And one of the key characteristics of a directed learner is that the teacher is in charge of the learning process. The teacher is the one that's setting the challenge. The teacher is the one that's saying, here are the skills you need to develop, and helping those students extend their habits of mind. The teacher is the one that is correcting the mistakes. You got this wrong, you need to do this to fix it. The teacher is the one that tells the student what to do, and these students will respond to that with their feedback. And as a result, these students spend their time producing. They get the work done. They can sometimes get the work done to a very high standard, and some schools get excellent results from these students. The challenge, though, is that these students rely on the teacher to guide them through the learning process. And this is actually the level where a lot of our teacher professional learning has been aimed, targeted over the last 10 or 15 years. Helping teachers scaffold, direct, provide feedback, set challenging tasks, and it helps. It'll get the results, it'll see the results improve. but it doesn't equip students to direct their own learning. The key characteristic of an independent learner is that they start to take charge of the learning process. These learners can target challenges. They know what their learning zone feels like and they go searching for it. They recognise that they can pick themselves up and direct their own learning. When their habits of mind fall short, they can develop their own habits of mind. They can say, I'm not very good at working in groups, but I need to be. How do I learn to do that? And so we'll go and develop the habit of thinking interdependently. These students use mistakes. They don't go asking, how do I fix this? They look at the mistake and go, what does this mistake tell me? Right, there's something I don't know here. What is it? And they'll interrogate the mistake to find out what it tells them, what information is buried in there that's going to help them move forward. These students will request feedback, but like I was saying before, it's after the event. Having not been able to work out what's wrong, they'll come and say, can you help me with this? I couldn't work it out for myself. And they spend their time striving. They spend their time pushing and challenging themselves, looking for something new to do. These are the first learners that will actually build agency in the world by being in charge of the learning process. When challenges come along, when they set their goals, they will actively engage in the learning process to change themselves into the sort of person who can achieve their goals. But it's not good enough. Our top level learner here, and I'll get out of your way, our top level learner is an agile learner. And this, of course, was the topic of my recent book, The Agile Learner. And the agile learner is someone who not only understands they're capable of growth, but skillfully understands how to engage in the learning process to achieve that growth. These are the people who embrace challenges. They embrace challenges in the spirit of JFK, who said we do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. They're unlike the independent or self-directed learner who sets a goal that they want to achieve. The agile learner embraces the challenge because it is hard. And they recognize that the real value of that challenge is that it allows them to cultivate their habits of mind. The more they develop, the more they fill their backpacks, in the analogy of the learning landscape, the more they develop those habits of mind, the more the world is going to become an easy thing they haven't done yet. They acutely understand this idea of investing their time and energy to always be in that growth pattern. These learners will design mistakes. They don't wait reactively for the mistake to happen and then interrogate it. They proactively design the mistake to give them the information they need. They think like a scientist and carefully dissect a problem and challenge it in a way to give them the information they need. They will tailor feedback in the way I talked about before. They'll actually say, I need this information because my learning goal is this. You're the person who can give me that information. Make sure you give it to me after you look at this. And as a result, they spend their time growing, developing, constantly challenging themselves to be better than they were yesterday. Where the independent learner can reach their goal and stay there, the agile learner is constantly developing themselves. And in that way, the agile learner becomes anti-fragile. Now, I'll just very quickly talk about this because I know we're running short on time. I can see Anna's asked, is there a curve of distribution? Anna, I have been doing this work now for a while, 6 or 12 months, and I've been asked, I've got a little diagnostic where teachers can work out what type of learners they've got in their classroom. And in every case, there is a bell curve. In every case, there is most of my students are here, a lot of them are here, a few are here and here. Except in 1 or 2 cases where that bell curve is so skewed to the left with non-learners that it's actually a gradient down here. So yeah, it absolutely is a bell curve. And the question I would challenge everyone to think about, and by the way, I did ask, as I went through those learners, where's the center of your bell curve? What is the most common learner in your classroom and your school at the moment? This is not a definitive study, but what have you got? Show us through. Let's see, you've got a lot of performers, Alicia. The question I'd like to ask is, with this answer that you're going to come up with right now about where your most common learner is, how would your classroom change if you could move all those learners one notch along? If most of your performance learners could become directed learners, if most of your directed learners could become independent learners, if your independent learners could become agile learners, because that's the goal of this work, to help your students not all become agile learners, not going to happen anytime soon, but to help all of them move along a little bit and over time, further and further towards agile learners. One of the reasons we want them to be agile learners is because agile learners are anti-fragile. Now, I won't spend a lot of time today. I might include a link in the follow-up email we'll send you, that agile learners are the sort of learners that are, as I say, anti-fragile, and they benefit from this disturbance, the things that go on all the time. For example, our directed learners during COVID have been the ones that have put up their hand and said, I don't know how to deal with this. Someone help me, someone tell me what to do. They needed the external direction in order to bounce back and recover, be resilient from the current pandemic. You know an independent learner, self-directed learner, because they're the ones using the word pivot for the last 12 months. They're the ones that had their goals, and then COVID came along and they said, well, new goals, time to pivot. Our agile learners, the ones that become anti-fragile, have said, what a great opportunity this is to help me do things I could never have done before. They're the ones that have embraced it as a challenge, as an opportunity to learn. Not a help me, not a necessity because it's happened, but here's a challenge that I didn't even think I was going to have to confront. But I'm going to come out the other side of it even better than I had before. And this idea belongs to Nicholas Taleb in his book, Antifragile, of becoming anti-fragile, something that benefits from disruption, is enormously powerful and will be the subject of another webinar another day. Question to ask though is there we go, where to from here? I've seen some questions come up along the way as I've sort of glanced across. How do we move students? What do we do? I've tried to give a few tips. Certainly the middle part of the webinar about identifying the learning zone, becoming comfortable with that discomfort, knowing what it feels like, helping students recognize different types of challenges are the starting point to some of this. But today was really about describing what learnership is and what the elements of it make it up, and to talk about why it's important. If you want to know more about this, there's some learning opportunities coming up. Now, clearly, learnership is a huge topic. I spend 3, 4, 5 days sometimes talking about mindset, and mindset is the first stepping stone in developing learnership. So in the work that we're doing now with various organisations around the world, and it's such a pleasure to be able to work around the world with schools. Coming up in November, I'm working with the Principals Academy in Singapore on November 8, 10, 11 and 12, 5 to 9 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. So New Zealand, a bit late in the night for you, but Great Western Australia and Singapore and a little bit further west. Or later in the month, November 22, 24, not 45, that's a typo. Anyone know when November 45 is? That should obviously be 25, 26, 12 noon to 3 p.m. Yeah, thanks, Anna. Australian Eastern Standard Time. 4 days, 4 hours each day in a learnership intensive. And I'd invite you to have a look at, if you're interested in building this work fairly soon, about how we can dive into those areas of first developing a growth mindset, helping students understand and improve their relationship with challenge, how we go about developing students' habits of mind. And can I just say here, if you're in that learnership exercise workshop here, we're going to be exploring a new tool around habits of mind. One of the projects I've had over COVID has been to work with Art Costa and Bennett Kalick, and we have developed a habits of mind profile tool, a tool that allows you to assess and guide the development of students' habits of mind. We are so excited about this. It is a game changer. You're going to hear a lot more about it next year, but in this workshop, you'll get a sneak peek at it as well. Links to registration, we'll send you an email around this as well, but if you're keen to know right now, jamesanderson.com.au/learnership. I'm also working with Acamus, which is a network of international schools through Asia and Mongolia, and running a similar train the trainer type program around learnership over January and February, late December, January, February. On top of that, 2022, I'm going to be running a Learnership Academy. And the Learnership Academy is going to stretch over term 1 and term 2. So if you're in Australia, New Zealand, those sort of areas, that's from sort of February through to June, where every second week, we'll be running an 1.5 to 2 hour workshop to dive into each of these areas. Every session's recorded, a whole lot of online resources. But the idea here is it allows you to build learnership as you go through the workshops. That we'll do a little bit about mindset and you apply it in your classroom. You'll come back again. We'll do a bit about challenge and you apply it in your classroom. And as you move through this series of workshops over 2 terms, so it's a significant piece of work, we're working side by side with you as you develop your learners as more skillful learners. I'm really excited about this idea of learnership, and I really think it's part of the piece that's been missing out of teacher professional learning over the last 10 years or so. We've been very, very focused on what teachers do in the classroom. And as a result, we've developed some really skillful teachers. But a lot of those teachers are exhausted because they feel like they have to drag, cajole, encourage students through the learning process. What learnership is about is making sure that you don't work harder than your students. It's about helping your students understand how to engage more skillfully in the learning process. And for some of them, just understanding that learning is a skillful process will be enough. Explaining that this is how you do it better, they'll go, oh, okay, I'll do that then. For example, how many of you, when I talked about tailoring feedback, went, oh, I hadn't thought about that. I might do that now. Just an understanding of what skillful learning looks like will allow some people to start applying that. But if that's not enough, we'll talk about the strategies to develop a growth mindset, move students along that mindset continuum, and then improve their relationship with challenge, develop their habits of mind, improve how they work with mistakes and feedback to gather that information, and understand how they are wasting, spending, or investing their time and energy. I'll hang around and have a look at some of the questions that have come up and respond to anything that's come up straight away. If you're watching the recording, the links to the resources, the links to the workshops will be down below. But I understand that we're right on the hour right now. So if you've got other places to go, please go there now. Thank you very, very much for being here. Hang around if you can, but otherwise I'll see you later on. Thanks, folks. Oh, I didn't want to laugh.